Hello, my name is Stefano Tempesta. I'm a Microsoft Regional Director and MVP based in Switzerland. In this how-to video for the European SharePoint, Office 365 and Azure community, we are going to see how we can use Office UI Fabric for dressing beautiful add-in in the classic SharePoint. As you may know, Office UI Fabric is the new dress for Office add-ins that perfectly marries with the modern SharePoint experience, specifically using the SharePoint framework. Now, besides providing a set of UI guidelines, font styles, grid layouts, and icons, Office UI Fabric adds also a rich collection of HTML components ready to use in your SharePoint add-ins. These components go under the name of Office UI Fabric JS. Office UI Fabric JS is a rich collection of components that include breadcrumb, button, contextual menus, data pickers, and so on. All you have to do to get started really is referencing some style sheets and JavaScript files that get you access to these HTML components, and then follow the instructions, follow the guidelines component by component for adding the relevant HTML code and the necessary JavaScript for initializing the component itself in your SharePoint add-in, as we are going to see soon. The classic SharePoint add-in we are building today is a weather forecast by city. I'm using the Open Weather Map API, which is freely available to a certain number of views. You can query this API by city name or even better, city ID. So this is what we are going to do soon, and once the API is invoked at a specific URL, which is your REST endpoint, the API returns a JSON message with all the necessary information about the weather conditions and a few other attributes that we want to display in the add-in itself. On the SharePoint side, I'm in my site. I've created a custom list called cities with some cities name and ID that are necessary for invoking the Open Weather Map API, as we said. When launching the weather add-in from my apps in testing, then I can see that there is a drop-down list, is a select component, is built with Office UI Fabric JS and displays city names retrieved from the custom list. Using the ID of the city, invoking the weather API, then I'm able to obtain weather conditions in the selected city. Okay, so now time to have a look into the source code of this classic SharePoint add-in. First of all, we have to reference the Office UI Fabric style sheet from the SharePoint CDN and the Office UI Fabric JS style sheet and JavaScript. And this is done in the code behind of my add-in page. Also, all the interrogation of data in SharePoint is client-side, so we use a JS file app.js for making the necessary queries to SharePoint. Okay, so now that we are in the JS file, this invokes as the add-in starts, an initialize page function, which basically obtain the client context of SharePoint, and when the document, the web page is ready, we will load the data, initialize the Fabric UI, and initialize the event handler in sequence. Now let's have a look a bit better how data is loaded, which is purely client-side SharePoint object model. I obtain the city list by title from my client context, build a camel query for retrieving all the list items, including city title and city ID, and then executing this query asynchronously. When the query succeeds, it will return a list of cities with ID and title that I can bind, adding an option to the select component on the UI. And on city selection, I'm invoking the Open Weather Map API by building the URI, combining the city ID, the weather app ID that you have to obtain in order to be able to invoke this API, and then specifying the units as metrics. The JSON message that I obtain back contains city name, weather condition, temperature, and humidity that I extract from the JSON object itself and then bind to the relevant items on the add-in page. So let's have a look at how the add-in page looks like. It's an MS Fabric content which contains, in this case, a grid layout very similar to the grid layout in Bootstrap, and then each specific component. So now we have a drop-down component which is identified by the ms-dropdown class, with the options that are built at runtime selected from the custom list in SharePoint. And then we have the other panel on the right hand side where we display all the items for the weather conditions, which are identified by a specific ID. You also can notice that the icons are displayed using the ms-icon and a specific icon name. They are all part of the Office UI Fabric style sheet. And that's it really. That's all you need for getting started with Office UI Fabric in a classic SharePoint add-in. A reference of a style sheet, JavaScript file, and then using the relevant CSS classes and initializing the UI component with JavaScript. All the source code for this relatively simple add-in is on my GitHub repository. Feel free to use it. And thanks for watching. Ciao.